Welcome to episode 55 of the FoodGrads Podcast, the podcast where we explore careers in the food, beverage, and agricultural industries. I'm your host, Veronica Hislop, a molecular science graduate student and career partner with FoodGrads. This week on the podcast, I interviewed Kirsten Sutaria, co-founder and head of Curious Creation at Wonderlab's Doozy Pots. They are a family-owned, female-led, curious bunch dedicated to creating wholesome indulgences that are kind of to the earth. Yes, it's possible. They have combined their love of delicious things, their passion for innovation, their passion for invention, and their food science savvy to craft delightful plant-based pleasures that you can't live without. But more on that later. On this episode, Kirsten and I talked about her career journey, spending over 13 years developing and launching products for iconic brands such as Ben & Jerry's and Unilever across North America and Europe. We talked about the creation of Doozy Pots, how it came to be, and the hemp-based plant space in general. I didn't really know much about the hemp-based space, but Kirsten explained to me how hemp is processed, its health benefits, and why there's so many regulations surrounding it, particularly in the United States, because things are a little different here in Canada. I also loved that in this episode, Kirsten and I geeked out a little bit about talking about ice cream science and how Kirsten was able to figure out a solution to a very unique ice cream problem. I love getting into the nitty-gritty of food science, especially fats. After all, I do study it. But Kirsten was a ball to talk to, and I love that she is using food science to create a unique, sustainable, plant-based gelato. So, enough with that introduction. Let's get on with the show. Thank you so much, Kirsten, for taking the time to come on the show. You, I think, have one of the most unique products that I've had for guests who've come on the show. And when I learned about it, I was like, I need to get this person on here and talk more about that. So thanks for coming on the show.
Of course. Thanks so much for having me.
So as I just mentioned to you have a very unique product called Doozy Pots. Would you be able to tell me more about that and what it is?
Sure. So Doozy Pots is a plant-based gelato, and we're the first frozen dessert vegan ice cream to use hemp and oats as a base. So we replace the dairy with hemp hearts and whole oat flour to make a really creamy, heavy cream base to create all of our gelatos. We're based in Cleveland, Ohio, and we started back in 2019. And we are now distributed in about 35 states and almost 500 stores.
That is amazing because I know the journey as an entrepreneur from what I've heard from talking to guests is it's a hard one, especially to go like nationwide. So congratulations on that.
Thank you. Yeah, it's just my husband and I. There's still only two of us that run the business. So it gets a little wild at times. And it can be a little bit of a roller coaster, but it's so much fun. And working in ice cream is just a great category to be in.
That sounds good. I know for some people it could either be a dream or a nightmare to be working with their significant other. So hopefully it sounds like it's been going well for you.
You know what? We've made it through, 2 years of COVID times, living together, running a business together, doing everything together. And we're still the best of friends. So it's been great.
That's so nice to hear. And one of the things that I wanted to talk more about is I know I definitely want to cover about you and your career journey, but I have to start asking more about hemp because I don't think many people in our audience would know much about it. And I don't know, it sounds like a really interesting topic. So could you maybe walk us through why you decided to go for hemp in terms of this product and just maybe some of the science behind it? You know what? I'll dive into that a little later. Let's learn a little bit more about hemp and why you chose it.
Sure. So about 5-6 years ago, I was doing some product development and looking at different plant-based proteins and read a scientific journal article about hemp food. So when I reference eating hemp, I'm talking about eating the hemp grain or the hemp seed. We use the hemp hearts, which is the inside of a hemp seed. It looks a bit like a sesame seed. It's a very kind of creamy white looking seed, very rich in plant proteins, has lots of healthy fats, has an ideal ratio of omega-6 to omega-3 fats, and it's also got quite a bit of fiber in it. So I was reading about the properties of the protein, which are very similar to egg whites. And I was thinking, why is no one using this in product development? And then the more I dug into it, it was illegal to grow in the US for 80 plus years. And that meant that you couldn't grow it for fiber, grain, anything. There's a whole history behind why you couldn't grow it that links back to the kind of early 1900s paper industry. And then it also got looped in with marijuana. So it was a very convenient excuse to outlaw hemp being grown. Hemp is a really also sustainable crop, grows very quickly without a lot of inputs, doesn't need a lot of pesticides. Most people know the common term for marijuana is weed. It does grow like a weed, but it's also a really, really versatile crop. So it can be used for medicines from CBD type of thing through to food and fuel and construction and cloth. And I have a pair of sneakers that I love that are made from hemp. So there's just so many uses for it. And I think it's a great crop. And back in kind of 2018, 2019, it became legal to grow hemp again. So we're in very early stages of what could be a big industry for hemp grain, but there's still a ton of work to do from a consumer education piece as well as from a retailer and industry education piece.
So when it comes to you're saying about an education piece, what is something that you'd like to see more prevalent in terms of education? What kind of messaging would you think would be important for people to know?
Hemp is not marijuana and hemp is not just CBD. I liken CBD to the fact that it's one compound in a plant, similar to the fact that coffee has caffeine in it. Coffee has caffeine in it, but it also has tons of other compounds and molecules, the nutrients and things that are in it. We made things a little bit hard for us because people found that you could have a bit of a loophole and call CBD full spectrum hemp oil, which confused the issue for us because we use hemp oil, but we use food grade hemp oil from the grain that has no active compounds in it. It's very much, it's no different than any other oil we might cook with, whether it's avocado oil or sunflower oil or coconut oil. It's an oil from a plant and it has no psychoactive properties and it's not going to do anything to you. It's just food.
Hmm.
And communicating that, we've had challenges anywhere from retailers saying they don't bring in foods with hemp in them, through to news stations saying that we couldn't come on because they don't agree with talking about hemp, through to Meta, sort of Facebook, Instagram, as well as TikTok, don't allow you to advertise ingestible hemp, and they don't delineate between hemp foods and marijuana edibles or CBD, which really, hamstrings us and how we can communicate some of our value proposition.
Wow. So you must, with that being said, I could imagine how much you believe in your product, because it does sound like there's a lot of hurdles and loopholes that you've had to go through. And it does stand out to me that it makes sense because on your LinkedIn profile, one of the things that you talk about is that you believe in science-based approaches. And maybe for me, I'm a little biased in the fact that I am a scientist. So I tend to think of food in that way. Has this approach been something that you've taken in terms of like marketing Doozy Pots, or has that affected it?
Yeah. So it's a really interesting time to be in plant-based and there's been a lot of sort of evolution over the past few years, and food tech has become like a huge thing, a ton of investment going into it. It's people want to talk about it, and we're the anti-food tech, if that makes sense. I just see so much potential in plants. We don't necessarily need to create new fats. We don't need to create new proteins. We eat, humans eat about a dozen things, a dozen crops, a dozen plants. There's a lot more room for kind of biodiversity. And for us, science runs through, the science of what's in our raw ingredients and understanding that. And also for me, really understanding the science of ice cream. What makes ice cream ice cream? It's one of the most complex and fun foods that we eat from a technical perspective. And how do we recreate that eating experience with whole food, plant-based things? And I think understanding, the science of hemp and what nutrients are in there, as well as the other ingredients like oat we use, is key. And it's key from sort of seed to shelf. Where is it being grown? How's it being grown? We really put a lot of effort into sourcing our ingredients. We use, and we're really proud to use, a regenerative organic cane sugar from a company called Native. And they have a no burn harvest method, which is pretty revolutionary for the sugar industry because most sugar is harvested and then the fields are burned every year after harvest, which can be incredibly detrimental to the surrounding areas as well as sort of the biodiversity and ecodiversity in whatever region it's being grown.
That's so cool. I love that because I know it's a refreshing way to hear about science too, because I know that science, people can, how do I want to say this? When it comes to science, we can think about what you were talking about, food tech, creating new alternative proteins and all that. But there's also that other side of science, which is like understanding the fundamentals, I like to say, at least that's what I do with my research, but just understanding like the land that something grows on, understanding how something works, understanding like you can use science to really understand what's already currently available. And I think that as well with Doozy Pots, I was actually, to be honest, a little surprised with your packaging choice because when I was looking at it, it seemed like a different perspective than I would have thought you would have taken. But it just seems like it's just showing off what a delicious product is rather than some other things. So I know I'm going on a bit of a tangent, but it was just something that I had noticed.
Yeah, our packaging so we're called Wonderlab's Doozy Pots, and the sort of joke is that the Wonderlab is my brain because I'm always thinking about a million things and how do I create new things and how do we find the wonder in the world around us to create delicious foods? And the lady on the front is Doozy Pots with the big hair, and it's just kind of a head full of ideas. And
That makes so much sense. I love it.
Thank you. I look at, and it's been interesting because we launched that packaging 3 years ago, and how does it sit on shelf? And it's beautiful, but does it resonate with the consumer? And that's the other piece of the science is like, what's the science of people's purchasing behaviors and stuff like that. So that is another piece of science I love. And I look at this kind of whole CPG world, and there's so much to explore in sensory science and consumer science and food science. And for me, there's just so much wonder in all of those questions.
Let's start digging more into that and like where that wonder came from. So would you be able to talk about your career journey? How did you end up getting into food science? And what's the path to getting to Doozy Pots today?
Sure. So I grew up in a family of foodies. My parents had restaurants growing up. I grew up working in restaurants from the time I was probably 12 or 13, anything from plating desserts to hostessing. My dad did quite a bit of product development when I was younger. And I realized that you could study food science and basically play with your food and not have to work in a restaurant, which was pretty exciting to me. I love working in restaurants. I think it's a lot of fun, but it's just not really a lifestyle that's conducive to a chill life. Neither is entrepreneurship, but that's a whole other can of worms. But I just thought, wow, cool. You can, work with food companies to create new foods. And when I went to college, I was trying to decide between either exercise science or food science. So those were my two passions. Ended up choosing food science, studying at Cornell with a focus in operations and management because I knew that I wanted to work on the corporate new product development side of things. And so a week after graduation in 2008, I started working with Unilever down in New Jersey, doing product development on frozen savory meal. Think like the Bertolli frozen pasta bags. It's a lot of IQF, fresh frozen vegetable sauce, pasta, and often a protein. Did that for about a year and a half, and then got an opportunity to move back to Vermont where I grew up and work for Ben and Jerry's as a product developer, which I did for almost 9 years. And that was the coolest job in the world.
I was going to say that's like a lot of people's dream job right there.
Yeah. And it was really fun because I was able to move back to Burlington, Vermont, where I'm from. And I always knew I wanted to work for a values-led company. I think having grown up in Vermont in the 90s, that was just the kind of vibe there was there. That's where Ben and Jerry's started, seventh generation, Burton Snowboards, a lot of beer companies started there. There's a really great local food movement. And that's just what I was used to. And that's really what I believed in. So it was really fun to be able to go work for a company that was one of the first big brands to really lead with their mission statement. And I think that kind of helped instill a way that I wanted to build products and build the future is making products that are not just delicious, but they're better for people, they're better for the planet, and they're doing the right thing, even if it costs a little bit more. From there at Ben and Jerry's, I had the opportunity to go over to the UK and work for 9 months, at which point I met my now husband. He was working as a lawyer, and I met him through an old friend. And so I spent 9 months in the UK working on Ben and Jerry's, ended up going back over there to work in the UK and launch and develop the plant-based line that launched in 2016, which was awesome, really fun. And then when I was in the UK, I moved over to a company called Innocent Drinks, which is very similar vibes to Ben and Jerry's, mission-driven, values-led company owned by a bigger company, which is Coca-Cola, and did product development there for a while. And then decided had the confidence to finally go out on my own. So in 2018, started doing product development consulting on my own. And then in 2019, after I had spent about a year working on figuring out what Doozy Pots could be and what it needed to look like, I moved back to the US and we moved to Cleveland with Carl in tow.
That's amazing. I just have to point out as well that Ben and Jerry's is it's a great case, like a good company. Like it's great to see a company that's like standing behind their values, but not only that, like actually creates a good quality product that just tastes good and has been succeeding for many years. And I don't see it going away. So it just goes to show that there is that opportunity to create these food companies that are like holistically good for you and also create like awesome products.
Yeah, it's so much fun. I think as a product developer, I have a rule that's I would never work on anything I wouldn't find myself. And a lot of times younger people will ask me, how do you find a job that you love? And it's like, think about what's in your pantry. What do you love? And, what are your beliefs and what drives you in life? And like find products and seek out those types of company.
That's really good advice. And I know starting with Doozy Pots, I give you credit too in terms of, I know you've clearly had a lot of experience working with ice cream from going to school with food and working at Ben and Jerry's. You charted some uncharted territory in terms of creating ice cream, in terms of like new ingredient that I'm assuming there wasn't that much to work on because, as you mentioned, it was fairly new in the United States. And how was that beginning process in terms of creating your idea? I'm assuming it's a difficult
crazy.
I would assume that it is.
We're in a niche of plant-based ice cream, and then I've niched us down and we're using hemp, and hemp is definitely our hero. But part of what my mission is to be able to prove that, there are so many plants out there we can eat, and there's more than one way to do this, and there are sustainable options. And it's just a matter of education. There is 5 years ago, there was no food grade hemp industry or industrial hemp industry in the US. There were a few states that had some pilot programs through state universities, and there was research being done, but the supply chain from a commercial perspective didn't exist. It still barely exists. So the challenge is in order for a farmer to put seeds in the ground, they need demand. But without consumer demand, there's this whole chicken and egg thing of why would I grow food grade hemp if I don't know if anyone's going to buy it? Because I have a fixed amount of acres and I have a fixed amount of resources. Why would I take a risk on this new crop? So there's that part. So there's farmer education that needs to happen. But then, great, the hemp is grown. Who knows how to process it? Who knows how to get the seeds and dehull the seeds and then turn those hemp parts into protein powder, protein isolate, fibers, oils that aren't like green and hempy and vegetable. So really, we are in, phase 0.5 of a robust hemp food supply chain in the US. Canada's a little bit ahead of us. They've been doing hemp for a while longer, and they've got some technology around like seed dehulling and getting the raw hemp parts, but they hadn't done a ton of that really value added ingredient that a product developer is going to pick up and say, yeah, I can create something with this. So it's been a challenge. We've worked with some domestic hemp companies on, kind of education on how do you sell this B2B? How do you go to a company and say, yeah, here I have this hemp protein and this is that it can replace pea protein and it can replace soy protein and here are your options of what you can do with it. And the other piece is just around cost, because I'm sure, as you can imagine, without a ton of acres devoted to it and without a robust supply chain, these things can still be pretty expensive.
For sure.
So it's been a challenge, but even in the last 3 years, there are some great companies that are also making hemp food products. There's 2 cheese companies that come to mind, one that's based in LA called Grounded Foods. They make amazing cream cheeses and goat cheese using cauliflower and hemp parts. There's another cheese company down in Florida called Catalyst Creamery, making really amazing plant-based like mozzarella and Bardi with hemp parts. A hemp tortilla chip company called Let There Be Hemp. So I think people are realizing that hemp is coming out of the shadows of the dusty health food sport, and it's something that's so green and crunchy, literally and figuratively, that it can, stand up right there with cashews and almonds and soy. But it's just going to take a little bit of that kind of consumer pull to get the industry jump started.
And because of all these difficulties in terms of these educations, it sounds like you're against like an uphill battle, so to say, and it could become discouraging. You believe in your product, but maybe others don't see in that. Like, how have you been able to keep going? Like, do you have any practices, any rituals that you do that just keeps you going?
Yes. So it's really, really challenging, and we're working to ban some of these hemp food companies together so that we have a slightly louder voice. And we've worked with some local and state government officials to just say, hey, if we're trying to build a domestic hemp industry, of which there could be a very large one, everyone needs to be involved from a sort of government level through to a commercial level. So we've talking to other people and just venting. And we've talked to some of the bigger social media companies, and they've basically said, we get it, but we have bigger fish to fry and we don't care, which is challenging because how are we supposed to grow this if we can't even really talk about it in the way that we want to? But for me, it's the belief that we have a great product and knowing that people are really enjoying it and we've gotten really good feedback. I think it's such a learning experience, but being out in public, demoing, sampling, sharing our product with people and seeing the surprise that we say, hey, it's made with hemp. And some people go, isn't hemp rope? Or other people say, oh yeah, I eat, hemp on my cereal every morning. And just understanding and educating. There's a lot of value there for me and just digging into the consumer. Are there days where I'm like, wow, I should have just made, a coconut milk ice cream because it would make my life a million times easier. Yes, but that's been done before. So it's,
Mhm.
I think true innovation doesn't come easy for sure.
Mhm.
But I do feel proud to see what we've been able to do.
That's amazing. And one of the things you talked about earlier in the episode was about how, increasing biodiversity in the sense of trying new things and new ways to have uses for products that new uses for crops that we might already be growing. Like I'm up here in Canada, so I am aware of the hemp hearts. Like I know the cereal one is the one that stands out to me. I know that there's a product who's been doing it for a long time now that I think about it. But I love the approach in just like diversifying our diets and all that, and maybe not necessarily creating new alternative methods of doing something, but just using a different crop that might not be as invasive or might be, I don't know, just like diversifying our diets. But it can be really difficult to start doing when you're just not really aware of these products. You go to the supermarket, there's so many that's out there, and you might not have the time when you're on auto drive to just go to the grocery store, grab your thing and all of that. So it's a tough space you're in.
It really is, and I think when people start to realize, oh, most of my diet is wheat, corn, soy, potatoes. There's not a lot we're eating. We're just eating the same few things made up in
Mhm.
a bunch of different ways. That's not a sustainable way forward. And I think, there's a lot of ways to have a slightly more sustainable diet. And one of those ways is to add some biodiversity into it, try new things. But that can be scary because we are so tied into what we eat and why we eat it and how we eat it and what are your family rituals and what does your culture bring to the table. It can be really hard to make changes to what you're eating and how you're eating, but I think going into things with an open mind and an exploratory nature will help us as we move forward and try to navigate how to eat for the future.
And has this also maybe changed how you look at your diet and explore maybe foods that you never did before?
Yeah, so I've always been a very sort of open-minded, exploratory eater, but as I shifted to eating more plant-based, I felt like I was challenged more in the kitchen, and it actually made me a better cook, more creative with spices, trying new kind of regional cuisines, how to build flavor with vegetables. It's just taken me on an adventure because it's really easy to grill a piece of chicken and put some salad leaves on the side and maybe have a sweet potato. Like you can do that pretty easily to put together grilled vegetables with some sauces and different grain stuff or beans and build flavor with that. To me is actually a more rewarding way of cooking.
That's a challenge that I'm working on right now. Growing up in the house that I have, my parents have not been exploratory eaters whatsoever, and that's just how they are. I can't blame them. I've moved out recently and I've wanted to explore cooking more, but I'm like, I don't it's I don't know. It might sound silly, but it's been hard for me to just like even know where to look because there's so many different options about cooking and all that. And I've been wanting to incorporate more plant-based items in my diet. But like you said, cooking off a piece of chicken in the oven is a lot simpler than trying to figure out how to deal with like lentils or lentils or chickpeas and just incorporating all these different things because it takes time because you got to research and learn more about it. I mean, it's exciting in itself, but it's a bit challenging when you're pressed for time.
Yeah, and when you're pressed for time, it can be hard to make new choices.
Mm.
It's very easy to kind of default to the same things that we love to eat and that are easy and we know how to do. And I sometimes forget that like I grew up in a house that made food a massive priority and it was just a big part of our life in every way. And I'm definitely more of a kind of exploratory eater than even my parents are. But I look at some friends and family members and like just the thought of preparing dinner is way too much for people. And that makes me feel a little bit sad because it's like uh, a lot of times don't even know the basics of like how to feed ourselves in a nutritious way. And we're so driven by convenience and we're so busy. that like cooking's a little bit of a lost art for most people.
Yeah.
So to ask people to start, cooking things that require more effort is like way too much work.
I wish I wasn't in that category, but I really am in terms of when it comes to cooking, because I think, again, it comes from the household that I grew up in. And now that I do think a lot of life's problems do come from the fact that we're just busy and we don't have time to do a lot of things. I truly believe that. But yeah, I realize when I have these conversations, it's so funny. I'm so involved in the food industry, and you'd think because my dad's a cook that I would be much more involved in enjoying cooking at home. But for him, when he would come home, last thing he wanted to do was cook more. And
That's the same thing with me. My dad was like, there's peanut butter, jelly, and bread in the cabinet. Help yourself.
yeah, yeah. And my mom's just never been a cook, so that was the sentiment. So it's just it's probably why I love the food industry as much in a weird way, because I grew up on processed foods and I still do. And I wish that cooking wasn't a chore, and I'm trying to slowly break out of that. But yeah, I'm happy though to see there's more options, at least in terms of products coming out. I know that from scratch cooking is like a great thing, but I don't know. I'm going on a tangent here just talking about things, but it's the factors that I think people might not necessarily think about when these products might be so amazingly good, but if it doesn't fit in someone's lifestyle, it's hard to get it in the daily life.
Yeah, and it's like habits are very, very hard to break. I lucked out because my husband is Indian and his family is Indian. So I grew up in Vermont, which is not a very diverse place. The only time you could get Indian food was like at the vegetarian restaurant, and it always just seemed like not my cup of tea. Being with him, living with him, eating his family's food, it opened up like a whole new world of like cuisine and flavors and how to build flavor when you cook. And that to me, I was like, oh, I, grew up around food and I felt like I had this sort of advanced palate. And I was like, whoa, there's a whole world that I never even looked at or thought about. So that, especially during past 3 years when we've been home a lot more, just given me an opportunity to explore a little deeper, but it's mostly because I had time to do it.
It's great that you had that opportunity to do so. I think a lot of people did reassess their food needs, at least during this crazy time. And it still continues to be with how grocery stores are right now and food prices.
Mhm.
All that, but I'm not going to get in that area right now. But instead, I'm going to go somewhere else. And this might be more of a personal question, but again, dealing with the product that you are, it can be really costly to be an entrepreneur. And one of the things that you're dealing with is ice cream, which I know you've talked about is one of the most, what's the word? Ice cream is one of the most complex foods that we have in terms of like phases and all that. And I know a little bit about that because my science at school, I study like food emulsions and I deal with fat crystallization. So like I know that. But when you were first starting out in terms of creating your product, did you have any difficulties scaling up your product? Because I could imagine that it's very hard to predict things on a small scale and then go up to big production. So was this of an issue for you at the beginning?
I felt like I had a head start because I had spent so much time in ice cream, but most co-packers are built on sort of our 1950s knowledge of ice cream, and they're built to handle dairy. And as I'm sure you know, different fats with different saturation levels crystallize in a different way. So
Mhm.
when you're trying to freeze things, which are also an emulsion, speeds and pressures and viscosities of things really impact how
The vein of my existence.
they work. So I would love to talk to you offline about that. The short answer is yes, we did have some challenges. We were doing all batch production. We were doing about 50 gallons at a time. It was all very manual. We could make maybe 500 pints a day, which is not too bad by hand, but my dad was scooping all of that stuff by hand, which is a little bit crazy. So we ran a couple trials with one co-packer and it did not go very well. That was running our mix through an HTST pasteurizer, which didn't work because we use oat flour and we were not using a hydrolyzed oat flour. We're using a whole oat flour, and with the temperature of the pasteurizer And the oat flour, it was hitting a temperature where the oat just wanted to gel and create a very thick mix.
Mm.
So that was a challenge. And then you might find this interesting because it was a real head scratcher. When we scaled up, we were seeing these like tiny white dots in our chocolate mix. And you could tell that when you melted it, you could tell that it was fat. All of the water was moving away from it. And it was like a pin size dot of fat. And I thought, it's the cocoa butter in the mix because we blended in some cocoa butter with the hemp oil to balance out saturated and unsaturated fat to be similar to a cream fat profile. So I took the cocoa butter out and it still kept happening.
Really?
And I was like, it's a 10-12 cocoa. And I talked to chocolate experts and they were like, there's no way you would ever pull that cocoa butter out of a 10-12 cocoa because you would need like a heavy solvent and really high temperatures. And it shouldn't be that. And it wouldn't be that. And it kept happening and it kept happening. And something was nagging me about the hemp oil because hemp oil is used in soap. And then I realized, thinking about hemp oil and then alkalized cocoa. And I was like, but when you make soap, you usually use an alkalizing agent to help it go from like liquid oil to make it a hard soap. So I started going down this deep tangent of I make soap. And I realized in reading a journal article that soap is often made with potassium carbonate, which happened to be what our cocoa was alkalized with.
Okay.
So then digging in a little bit more, I reached out to our cocoa company and I asked them how much of the alkalizing agent was in there. And we realized that there was enough in there for it to saponify fractions of the hemp oil in the ice cream. And then as it was getting churned and frozen, especially with you weren't seeing it at, warm or refrigerated temperature, but you were definitely seeing it as it was being churned and frozen.
Mm.
I ended up moving to a natural cocoa from an alkalized cocoa, but this was like a probably 4 or 5 month long process of trying to figure it out. And I was like going on this tangent of reading all these journal articles about saponification, and it was a little bit nut, but it was really interesting. And there's no one's done this before. So there's really no precedent for, if you use alkalized cocoa with hemp oil in this certain sort of environment where you're heating and there's water in there, that might happen, which was crazy.
That is okay. Retrospect, like looking outside of it, it's so cool, like that you were able to go through it. But I could imagine during the time it was like pulling out your hair and just like, why is this coming out? Because that would be the first thought that I had when you were talking about. I would just think, oh, the crystal and all that type of stuff. But wow, that just showcases the differences in ingredients and just like producers and all those types of things that coming from that science background really would help you being able to dive into the scientific literature. Because I do know a lot of entrepreneurs, they might not necessarily come with a food science background. They're coming from totally different fields. So to be able to come to that conclusion in yourself, it really can attest to the benefits of having that background.
For sure. It was, and even for me, I was like reaching out to experts and people are like, yeah, I have no idea. And I think it was just my kind of trial and error science mindset, whereas like, I will not stop until I figure out what's happening, because as a scientist, you're like, I see something that's happening and I don't know why, but I need to know why. So I will go to the ends of the earth to figure out why this is happening. And we figured it out. But I was really pulling my hair out. But now that I have that, it's a kind of story. I was like, that was so fascinating. And my great grandfather, his family had a soap company in New York. And I was like, maybe I just had some spirit guiding me of look at the soap.
That's amazing. And then you come out of it like really understanding your product even more. Like you are really getting into the intricacies of it. And that's like my favorite part of food and like food science. Food can be so many things. You talked about the consumer science from thinking about how do you purchase it, but then you can think of it about as a material. How does it work? Like all these things come together. It just like you stand back and you're just like, wow, food is awesome.
Yeah, there's so much to explore and there's so many interactions happening and it's just such a fun category and industry to work in.
And with that being fun, if you were to give advice to students who are looking to go into, let's say, research and development, what advice would you give them?
I would say, I hope you love food and you're a very curious person because those are two things that I think are really important in this industry is maintaining that curiosity of what is this? Why is it happening? How do we create new things? And I think we're in a point of how do we, feed people in the future and we need lots more creative minds and forward thinking people to get into the industry. So if you're growing up and you're in high school or you're getting ready to go to college, or even if you're in college and food's something that you're passionate about, definitely pursue it. I think the food industry also just has such a great network of fun, smart, dynamic people. It's an amazing community to be a part of. So working in the food industry is never dull.
And just to point out as well, to add on the fact that you were able with this problem to reach out and start asking a lot of people for their advice, I think that is a testament to just like how friendly people are, because many industries people would be like, nope, I'm not telling you nothing. So
Mhm.
the fact that you can have a rich network, I think really is a testament to that.
For sure. There was one person I talked to. I was in Seattle. It was probably 10 or 11 p.m. and I was talking to a chocolate expert that was in Singapore. And I was like, this is a great snapshot into the food industry. Like I found someone who knew someone who put me in touch with this guy and he was like, yeah, I'm in Singapore. And I was like, I'll talk to you at whatever time I need to, as long as I could talk to you. It seemed like you might be able to help me.
I love that. I'm gonna leave it there. Because I want to leave it on a great note just to highlight how amazing the industry is. And that's why this podcast is here to highlight people who are doing amazing things like you, Kirsten. But before I let you go, I have to ask, where can people find you and where can we find Doozy Pots if we wanted to get some?
Sure. So I can be personally found on LinkedIn. Doozy Pots is on Instagram at Doozy Pots. And then you can find our gelato in Sprouts across the country. We're also in Jimbo's Naturally Food stores down in San Diego, in Heinen's in Ohio, as well as Market District and some other independent stores. But if you go to our website, wonderlabdoozy.com, there's a store locator there, and hopefully you can find some sites near you.
Amazing. And I'll make sure to link that in the show notes because this is a very unique product that I don't think anyone, a lot of the audience, well, hopefully they have tried. So, with that, thank you so much, Kirsten, for coming on the show. I learned a lot and I got to go check this out.
Thanks so much for having me, Veronica. It was really a pleasure and look forward to chatting again soon.
That was episode 55 of the FoodGrads Podcast. All the notes to this podcast can be found on the FoodGrads blog or by clicking on the Student and Grads tab on the homepage. There you can find any notes to past or future episodes. Do you know anyone on the show you would like me to interview? Perhaps yourself. Or maybe there's a specific career path you would like me to explore. Then reach out and let me know. You can email me at veronica.hislop, Hislop, at foodgrads.com or any of the FoodGrads social media channels. Or find me on any of the FoodGrads social media channels. Hope to hear from you. Food science is so cool. I know that a lot of entrepreneurs come into the consumer packaged goods space with a great idea and a product, but they don't quite have that science piece behind them. There's a difference between creating a sauce, as you might have seen with the pink sauce, and bringing it out to market while thinking about all the things like regulations and how to store it in the long run, because that actually, I believe, was a big issue with the pink sauce. If you want to know more about the pink sauce debacle, I'll link it in the show notes. But I think this was a really good example to show how science is so important to have that in the background. And it's really important that we have their passion that it's super important. It builds up the space. However, I do think there's something to be learned from those that start businesses who have science-based degrees like Kirsten. As someone who's doing a PhD, I personally think of foods more like a material, like in the same way you would think about how wood is used as a construction material used for building a house. What ingredients you choose and how you process them affects the end result. And you have to think longer term than just maybe in a month's time or a week's time. Like these things have to be shelf stable. So there's a lot of science that's involved with it. But I know that I am biased because of my background, but I have also seen how science pushes forward innovation. With climate change being on everyone's mind and the food system being in the spotlight, we need innovation. You can have the best ideas, but if you can't translate the science or find the science to match and bring out your idea, then it just doesn't happen. I think that Kirsten having her husband as a co-founder is also the perfect example about how a food business needs that business side and the combination of that with a science side to bring it together and flourish something that's pretty amazing. Kirsten looks at, for example, I don't know, scientific journals, figuring out these problems, coming up with these science-based solutions to these processing problems, while her husband ensures that the business is actually viable because that's just as important. Though overall, I do want to say that I do think that yes, the food space might have its challenges, but I think this is a great opportunity for so many people to just come together, bring their ideas, bring their backgrounds. Everyone has a unique set of skills. And if we can all come together, we can make substantial changes to our world and create a more sustainable future that is good for all of us. Anyways, that's it for this week's episode. Thank you everyone so much for listening, and I will see you next time.